spent a lot of time talking about the WIN database in terms of data storage, access, retrieval, how to deal with error, a lot of things. And kind of the discussion you hear around the table is that, well, don't worry about any of that stuff. Gary's going to fix it for us. Some of the, and I have full trust in the WIN group to deal with a lot of those things. It was also mentioned yesterday that one of the challenges with data collection is to sort of have to have a sense of what questions you might ask, not tomorrow, but down the road a ways. So Gary's going to talk to us again about things that you can do with the model potentially down the road, some of the opportunities to looking at new research needs, gaps in the data, and stuff like that. So once again, let's welcome Gary Beauvais.
So I think one rule of a symposium like this is to never follow Ryan Lance. I'll apologize in advance for not being nearly as insightful or inspiring as Ryan. I like this idea of why. I don't know about 9 of them. I don't know if I can keep 9 of them in, sort of keep track of that in my head, but you know, I think when we do start to ask these questions of why are we doing certain things? I mean, science is part of that, but science isn't really good at the why questions. You know, when it comes to meaning and why do we do things, science, it can contribute to those answers, but it's not built for that. But science is built more for the, you know, sort of the how much, how many, you know, when, those kind of questions that start with that are that's what science is suited for. But I think, you know, if you run down that why list and ask yourself, well, why are we all here? At some point, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, nobody here wants to see any native species go extinct. Everybody here wants to conserve native species, raptors included. I think that's a, you know, that's a fundamental part of that asking why in there. How is a hard question, though. I mean, we can all talk about where we want to be and why we want to be there. How do we get there? I think that's the hard question. So yeah, I want to talk about research issues. I'm going to have to take on a little bit of a split personality here because yesterday I was talking as the director of the Wyoming Natural Diversity Database. Today I'm going to be talking mostly as my position as interim director right now for the Biodiversity Institute at the University of Wyoming. It's a separate research and service unit at the university. The previous director stepped down. They haven't yet hired a permanent director, and so I'm serving as interim director right now. WIN and the BI, the Biodiversity Institute, we work really closely together. We have a lot of common goals and projects. And the BI is very well suited to this question of okay, what are the priority research questions? How can we get them done? The mission statement generally is that the Biodiversity Institute fosters understanding, appreciation, conservation of biological diversity through a whole range of things. Research is one of them, but also education and outreach, and by generally engaging the public and a very broad audience in the whole scientific and, I would argue, management and policy process. So, you know, mission statements are good. Mission statements are kind of a why, but I think more illustrative is sort of how we go about our work. Because again, to get to why, you have to go through how. The Biodiversity Institute isn't interested in becoming a research unit. It recognizes that there are a lot of research units out there at the University of Wyoming and in agencies and in other universities. Our job is to sort of engage that existing research infrastructure, people, personnel, resources, join them up with these research questions of immediate importance to conservation and management. We want to do this, be really explicit about decision-relevant science. Find out what the questions are, find out who can answer those questions, and then connect them. We sit in the middle. How do you connect these? How do you tell researchers what to do, especially university researchers who often know exactly what they need to do, and they will tell you this because they're university researchers and they're important, smart people. How can you sort of turn that battleship towards particular questions? Money. That helps. When you tell people, here are interesting research questions and here's some funding to go and study them, suddenly they understand they want to study those questions. And so the Biodiversity Institute is interested in identifying not only these questions and these researchers, but finding the funding and matching them up through that process there. But also, the BI has a very strong educational and outreach function as well. We realize that research doesn't happen. Science doesn't happen in a vacuum. That science has to have public support. It has to have funding, and in a large part, it's public funding. And so we're also really interested in taking this research, this decision-relevant research, and wrapping around it a lot of educational programs, a lot of outreach programs to build public awareness. In this case, and in our context, to build public awareness and appreciation of good raptor management that's going on out there, of the successes that people have had. Bring it into the schools, let kids learn about it, let them learn about science with some real world examples. This isn't a real complicated model. I think in a sense we all assume this should happen, right? This is how the world should work, that there are important questions we all need answered. Scientists are there to answer those questions. That happens and the world moves ahead. This is how the world probably really works, right? There's this really well-known communication gap between the scientists and the resource managers. You imagine the scientists standing on one side of the canyon and the resource managers and the policymakers standing on the other side, and they kind of yell back and forth. And occasionally the scientists think they know what they heard, and they go off and do some cool science, and they walk up to the side of the canyon and they throw it into the bottom, usually in the form of journal articles and obscure journals. And they kind of dare the resource managers to go down and get it and use it. And the resource managers don't have the time or the capacity or the resources to do that. They're too busy managing resources. And I think you can put policymakers in here as well. There's this real disconnect here, I think, that is the way that the world tends to operate. So we need to bridge this gap. And that's what the BI wants to do, is to build that bridge, make this dialogue happen a little bit more effectively, and move the science not only in the format of research results over to the resource managers, but to make sure it's in the right format and in the right tools that these folks can use. This is nothing new. If you Google communication gap, then you see all sorts of discussions of it and all sorts of much better images than my sort of cartoon previously. Much more clever ways to illustrate communication gap in all sorts of different contexts, including natural resource management. Some are kind of funny, right? Couldn't we communicate better if we actually built a bridge rather than send paper airplanes back and forth? Some are sort of intellectual, right? The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. This one's my favorite because I don't really know how to interpret it. I think maybe that's the point, right? Is communication gap. But regardless, this does exist, and I think there's a real opportunity to bridge that. And again, that's where the BI wants to come in. There's different ways to go about this. One way which is being pursued and has been pursued and is really effective is to convene formal teams, right? Conservation teams and working groups. Convene these teams, put them on a strict schedule, give them a charter and a mission, and have them really just start hammering out what is the decision relevant science, who's going to do it, how's this going to happen, what is the schedule, where's the funding coming from. The Fish and Wildlife Service is doing that, I think, with the Golden Eagle Working Group right now. There's lots of working groups and The sage grouse issue was tackled like this with local working teams that were yarded up into regional working teams. That's a really good approach. That's a really good way to get smart people together and tackle this, and it's a real formal way to do it. I think there's also other ways to do it, like right here in this room today. We have a lot of smart people that know a lot about raptors, raptor management, a project operation in the context of raptor management, raptor science, research. I think we need to take advantage of forums like this to just start listing this out. Tell us what these are. We have some coming out of the 2015 event. We have others that have been discussed here. I want to use a lot of time in this presentation slot just to open it up to folks to say, what are these questions? Ryan came up with some. I think there are some other ones that people have in mind. Let's put these out. I think to do that best, there's a couple of things that we should keep in our mind. First, there is this kind of dichotomy between applied science and pure science, which we talked about yesterday. You know, there's decision relevant science up here. There's theoretical pure science down here. This is something of a false dichotomy. This was brought up to me yesterday, and I think it's true. Pure science, you know, basic science, theoretical science, down the road that becomes applied science. That's why that's an important part of what scientists and researchers do. But I think, again, what we're talking about is work that can be applied right now, right? We're all here. We want to know what these questions are that need to be answered right now so that people can start using that information this season, you know, in the off season, next season, fairly immediate stuff. There's also, I think, a really important consideration here between sort of what might be called primary science or this discovery science, you know, this idea that scientists go out there and they discover something that has never been discovered before, and it's this kind of eureka moment, and that's great stuff. But there's also this issue of summarizing existing science, and that can be really, really useful because in a lot of the questions we're talking about here, about perhaps the effectiveness of buffer zones or some of these other issues, I would argue that the research has been done, and it's out there. It's just not accessible, and it just hasn't been summarized in a really effective way, and it hasn't been expressed in tools that can be applied, you know, right now by managers or by project operators. You know, the degree to which science can inform policy and management is not simply a matter of whether it's been done or not. It's a matter of how accessible and how useful it is. Again, you know, I'll point to the Western Golden Eagle conservation team doing that right now. You guys are doing a structured review of current science and getting all that in one place. Scattered science isn't useful. If it's all summarized, stacked together, the centralized database is another issue of that. There's been a lot of raptor monitoring, raptor nest monitoring data collected. Let's get it all into one place so everyone can look at it in one body and see what kinds of conclusions we can draw from that. So I get in trouble with university professors sometimes by forwarding this notion that, you know what, a lot of really hard conservation questions, the science has been done. The answer is out there. It's just not very useful, and we need to make it more useful because a lot of academics like to think that they're in the business of this. And that's fine. But this often is more useful. Also mentioned yesterday, there's this idea that as projects in the field move from a planning stage to actual operation, there are some differences in the type and precision of science that might be needed to guide those different project phases, from sort of coarser estimates to more precise estimates, and in some cases, extrapolation from existing studies in other areas versus more site-specific work. It's tempting to say that this tends to be cheaper and faster kinds of research to conduct, and this tends to be slower and more expensive over on this end of the scale. I don't know that that's true. I actually I knew a whole lot more about this until I thought about it. I thought I had this clear in my head, and then I thought about it last night, and I actually thought about pulling this slide out because I'm not quite sure how what we might be able to draw out of this. But it is something to I think at least these first two panels is something to consider, that the type of scientific guidance needed at different project phases does tend to differ in precision and in the degree of information. And then finally, before I get to the fact that we really do want to list out some of these research questions, what about this educational and outreach issue of the Biodiversity Institute? Again, research and science not conducted in isolation. It needs to have public advocates. It needs to have a lot of support. It needs to have some awareness of the general themes and the topics. The Biodiversity Institute wants to do that. We want to bring good raptor management and responsible raptor management, and just the fact that birds of prey are a great Wyoming resource that people should appreciate. We want to promote that. It's easy with raptors, right? This is the famous cartoon. Birds of prey know they're cool. They already have a big public following. They have a lot of cachet out there right now. I like this. This one down here, he's listening to a cassette player. And if there's anything cool today, it's listening to cassettes, right? It's kind of a dated cartoon, I think, but the idea still holds. Birds of prey already enjoy a big public following. We want to build on that. We want to keep going with that. How are we going to do that? The staff right now at the Biodiversity Institute has a lot of experience with citizen science projects, getting the public out into the field to look at and collect scientific data relative to birds of prey. We're looking to incorporate and to establish a lot of citizen science projects involving raptors right now in the state of Wyoming. There's an existing program of organizations that use captive raptors to engage the public and especially engage young people. There's in Laramie, there are examples where we've had youth groups build and install kestrel boxes out in open spaces and in some cases in Fish and Wildlife Service refuges right around Laramie. Radio, web broadcasts, cooperation with other partners working on raptors. There's lots of ideas that we have and lots of roads we're going down to sort of build up this public awareness of raptor issues in Wyoming. One big one that I'll hit on just real briefly here, but is important, is this idea of raptor nest cameras that have live web feeds that can go out. I suspect a lot of people have looked at these. I mean, have people looked at instrumented web feeds of raptor nests out there? They're kind of astoundingly popular in other regions. We've actually looked around for webcams for instrumented raptor nests in Wyoming. I think there's one over in Jackson. Go down in Colorado on the Front Range, go out to other states, there's dozens of them, and they get kind of phenomenal use. The public loves to watch raptors on nests. You can Google around and you can find tons of pictures from these things. Ospreys really tend to be a really popular raptor to put nest cams on, and some nest cameras for ospreys in some areas will get over 100,000 views in a season. Just people love these things. We want to instrument some nests in Wyoming. We're actually going to train ourselves on how to do this by in about 3 weeks putting a nest camera. We've got the gear in, we've got it ready to go. We're going to put it on a Cooper's hawk nest on the University of Wyoming campus. We know where this pair nests. They're going to be there in about 3 weeks. We're going to work through the details on this. A lot of resource companies use these in other areas to promote their resource management, to promote the fact that they're doing good mitigation, they're doing good work. We're really interested in finding some partners to work with in Wyoming where we can do this, where we can put up some cameras, we can get some web feeds out, we can have schools adopt particular nests, we can develop some curricula to give to the teachers so that the teachers can work with their class when they log in and look at what's happening. How many eggs are there? How many young are there? What kind of prey is being brought in? Build up a lot of education around this. And to tackle hard questions like, yesterday there were 3 chicks and now there are none. They all died. That happens. Sorry, kids, that's life. There are some great incidents on the web where people are watching their favorite osprey nest where the chicks are growing up and they've been watching it for months, and then, oh my God, an eagle comes by and kills one. And people go crazy. Well, that's kind of life, and that's ecology, and let's talk about it. And these are the kinds of issues that can be brought up by these educational and outreach tools. So we're very interested in finding partners to help us move ahead on this raptor nest cam idea. So let's get to work. Here are some of the issues, some of the research issues or the science products that came out of the 2015 symposium. A couple others in there that have been talked about today and yesterday. There were some other ones that I've jotted down here. I think, again, when we pull a group like this together and we say, my gosh, let's get some decision-relevant science done, all right, let's do it. What are the topics we need to tackle? If you had a question, a raptor ecology question, a raptor management question that would make your job a lot easier if it were answered with some confidence by the research community, what is that? Let's get it on the list. I have no illusions that this is going to be any kind of a final list that comes out of the symposium. I think after the symposium, we'll want to, sort of convene these technical groups again and prioritize and organize and kind of modify this list. But let's get the starter list going now. There's been a lot of talk about buffer zones. I think effectiveness of buffer zones may be a general topic we may want to put up there on this list. Some idea about effectiveness and population effects of particular buffer zones. Species by species prioritization. Running through the species list of raptors, can we talk about which ones might be of more concern than others? The red tail versus the ferruginous hawk kinds of issues. Is this something that the research community can tackle in an objective way and contribute some information there? What's that? Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good one. Others, I would want to open it up and use the sort of the collective brain power here.
Andrea Orabona, Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Gary, because we've been working together on the State Wildlife Action Plan, but just so that others know, that's something that the Game and Fish Department uses to identify what species we consider sensitive or species of greatest conservation need. We are in the process, we've been working with WIND to come up with species accounts on our sensitive species or species of greatest conservation need. And the updated State Wildlife Action Plan, which is actually required by the Fish and Wildlife Service, every state that wants to receive state wildlife grants funding from the Fish and Wildlife Service has to have a State Wildlife Action Plan. And these plans have to be updated periodically. So we're in the process of updating our Wyoming State Wildlife Action Plan. The previous plan was in 2010. The new plan should be finished in 2017, hopefully, or early 2018. But I would suggest that we look to the State Wildlife Action Plan when it's ready to be looked at, and we pull out for raptor species that are considered species of greatest conservation need questions like this, where we can look to what research do we need to do in order to answer these questions. But I think it's a little preliminary to put them up here at this moment.
But I think that's a great point, though. We talked about this idea of sort of discovering things brand new or summarizing existing work. There's been a whole lot of work that's gone in, a whole lot of thinking that's gone into the State Wildlife Action Plan, and to come up with what are the big information gaps on a species by species basis with I don't know how many raptors are species of greatest conservation need, maybe half a dozen, maybe not
Yeah,
quite
probably,
that many.
maybe about that, sure.
Yeah, 4 or 5, something like that. I think, I think something that goes on the list is review the priorities and the research priorities in the State Wildlife Action Plan. Are there other agency documents out there that have done similar things? Have they summed up what those information gaps are? We should just roll those into the list here, just like off of the swab. Yeah.
Gary, Tim Byer with the Forest Service. You put up there to evaluate the effectiveness of buffers, but besides the effectiveness of buffers, what else can we do out there in a programmatic manner? As a land manager for an agency, we need to be programmatic, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when the panel sets up. But what else? If buffers aren't meeting our need, what else can we do? But it has to be programmatic. And so going out to individual nests and doing that kind of evaluation isn't physically possible with the staffing we have or the finances that we have. And so we need to look at something else that can be programmatic.
So programmatic alternatives to buffers or something along those lines?
Correct. The other one I had for you is also going back to the raptor and prey base relationship, that we all know, most of us that deal with raptors, at least in this part of the world, you can watch our rabbits and our prairie dogs and other things, and as they crash, you know that you're not going to have a very productive breeding season. So if there's models or things out that can get to a point where we know when we can expect those kinds of things, that again informs management.
I think that's exactly right. There's, kind of these shockingly tight correlations between raptor productivity and prey density. Everybody knows clearly, yeah, there's got to be a general relationship there. Lots of rabbits, lots of ground squirrels, lots of raptors. But the tightness of that relationship is really kind of stunning how tight it is. If that's the case, then it makes sense to do exactly what you're talking about. Let's figure out what is that fractional contribution of prey to the overall productivity in a year, because then the effectiveness of a given management action or mitigation action has to be measured in that context. You can do the best management and mitigation possible, and if it's a bad prey year, they're not going to produce. You can't blame all of that on management. You can't blame all of that on how you set up your nest structures. Nothing would have helped in that year. And conversely, in a high prey year, anything you do is going to seem like it's really successful because the raptors are producing a lot because they have a lot to eat. If we can quantify that.
If you can find that line or that threshold that talks about if our prey base is below this level, reproduction of frugivorous oxen is not going to happen.
That's right.
That's the line to look for.
That's right. That fractional contribution. That's a great one.
Gary, Ryan Lance, going off of that, with my day job at Sweetwater, we had proposed a bank based upon prey-based enhancement, and I don't know if that's relevant here or there. I was intrigued by the eagle conversation yesterday based upon that, but from the Thunder Basin effort up here and otherwise, it would be good to know, similar to what the Golden Eagle effort is trying to tease out, what mitigation options are there, which ones are favored, and how do you actually get some of that permitted, such that you can stand up either a bank arrangement. Right now we have lead abatement, you have power pole retrofit, you have carrion removal and all of that. Is there a landscape scale habitat-based model that would work? And then secondly, and sort of tearing off of the programmatic effectiveness of buffers and the alternatives to buffers, with some of these avian protection plans that have been approved, what have we learned from them? Have they worked?
Yeah, that's great. I like this idea of working with the prey base in that active management and mitigation context. What do you do to improve habitat for white-tailed jackrabbits over a large landscape? I don't know that we know that well right now. Jackrabbits and ground squirrels, they're kind of in one sense, they're kind of the forgotten species of the wildlife ecology research side of things. They're not terribly sexy to work on. They don't get a lot of attention, but I think we need to work on them. And in a decision-relevant context, we certainly do need to work on them. Yeah, that's a great one.
I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm probably like in the middle of everyone in this room. We have the policy folks and we have the biology/scientist folks. And then there's us industry folks that are like somewhere in the middle. And there are certain times where the hard and fast facts of science and the hard and fast things that we have to follow as policy folks, sometimes it lands in the middle somewhere. We have goofy birds that do goofy things, and sometimes the science tells us that a ferruginous hawk likes to nest on the ground, but they'll take a really high golden eagle platform, so we cut it off so they can't see our stuff, and then the golden eagle comes and takes the short one. I mean, we have all of these kind of weird things that happen in the middle, and sometimes as industry folks, we're kind of like trying to just throw crap at the wall and see what sticks, really.
That's tough, because what scientists do, like we talked about yesterday, with all those points on my unlabeled graph, right? We go out and we collect all those points, and it's kind of a mess on the graph, but then we draw that line through the middle of it. And that line has some predictive value in most cases, most of the time, but it's not going to predict every single case, every single time. The line is what policy is established on, right? Saying, well, okay, establish this buffer around the nest of this species, and you'll be okay. Most of the time, in most cases. You go out and you do that, and that nest fails. And the adults leave because of disturbance, even though you had that buffer on there. You're held to the case-by-case stuff, whereas the policy is designed on the... Yeah, you're held to what happens on a case-by-case basis, even though the policy is based on these generalities. This is why I'm glad I'm a scientist and not a project operator, because that's the hard work. I don't know what the answer is to that one. What happens? How can when good science fails in a specific instance, how is that dealt with in the management and the policy realm? Boy, I don't know.
I'd like to bring the conversation back around for a second to the predator-prey discussion. There's the coal mines have been collecting prey data. It's a requirement, as I understand it, for decades, even longer. So there is information. I believe there's a graph that Gwen provided. So this shows that when prey populations cycle, the raptor populations cycle as well. But we don't know this. We can't. I mean, this is a really great visual to show that, but we don't know it unless we collect the data. So we did identify 2 years ago that some sort of standardized prey surveys would be very beneficial for everybody in this room. And I think that's something that we should not let fall through the cracks. Similar to, we worked over the past 2 years to standardize the raptor nest survey data sheet. And I think it would really behoove us to move forward on some sort of, prey monitoring standardization.
In a pretty broad sense, I think statewide,
yes.
And I think with a lot of thought put into what are the different habitats that we want to sample in proportion to their availability out there, and really do a good job in building that sampling design, and come out of there with an estimate, at least for rabbits, lagomorphs, and ground squirrels.
And ground squirrels, right.
I think methodologically that would be easiest to do. You could imagine getting a crew out to a particular sample plot. They sample in the daytime for ground squirrels. They spotlight at night for an index of cottontail and jackrabbit abundance, and then move on to the next. I mean, I think there would need to be some pilot work to work out the power of all the statistical power and how much time would have to be spent per transect or per plot, however we work it out. But I think that would be a great contribution to this whole question about prey and raptors, and what is the prey, what are these thresholds beyond which we can't expect any management to work, above which we can expect fractional contribution from particular management. Yeah.
Right. And I think that would help to take the burden off of industry. If population crashes are not because of something they're doing, then that does help industry. So I think it really would help everybody in the room. Thanks.
Hi, Tom Bills from the BLM. I got 2 questions to add to your list, Gary. First one is identifying regional differences and then trying to understand those differences a little bit. And I'll give you a couple examples. Several of us in this room were in Cheyenne a couple of months ago working on a raptor conservation plan for a project here in Campbell County. And we got to talking about ferruginous hawk nests and the differences between the Powder River Basin, Campbell County area, and the Red Desert. Red Desert, they use a lot of artificial nest structures. They nest on oil and gas facilities. You don't see that up here. So why is that? So that's one. Another example sort of similar to that, when we're working on our resource management plan, hey, Buffalo, how come you have one buffer for golden eagles and Bighorn Basin's working on a resource management plan, they have a different buffer. So we got to ask that question. We started looking at it. Same thing. We have different nests. They're nesting in trees here. They're nesting on cliffs there. So regional differences. And then back to that, the ferruginous hawk discussion. Okay, we got to discuss that a little bit more. And one of the ideas that came up here in the Powder River Basin, it's primarily private land. There's a lot of lambing going, sheep, they're mostly sheep ranchers. All the ranchers in this particular project area except for 2 run sheep. So the idea got to be, well, predator control might have a lot to do with the differences. So that's one, regional differences, identifying them and trying to understanding them. And then, and then the second was predator control. Is that or is that not, potentially, a factor with raptor nesting?
Lauren Troop, Hayden Wing, Wildlife Consulting. I just wanted to piggyback a little bit off what Andrea was saying about the raptor prey-based surveys. Our company has some clients up here in the Powder that are voluntarily doing raptor prey-based surveys, even though they're not required to do so by the BLM. And I would just suggest to other contractors and to operators here that that's something that you look into, because it's really pretty cost effective. And like these folks were talking about, you can do some pretty easy spotlight surveys for rabbits. And the other thing we've been doing is doing burrow density surveys at prairie dog towns. And it's a pretty standardized survey methodology that was developed by the Fish and Wildlife Service for assessing kind of suitability of areas to reintroduce black-footed ferrets. But it's pretty easy. You just kind of zoom around in these prairie dog towns and kind of compare densities. And anyway, it's a really cost-effective way to get a measure of prey density. And I think we've pretty compellingly made the case to our clients that it's really in their best interest to put a little funding towards that, because it is so, it informs so much of those raptor population cycling that you see. And so instead of, being the kind of the bad guy in the room, like, raptor populations are crashing, obviously it's oil and gas. You can have some other explanatory factors. So.
No, that's right. It's raptors have to eat. I think that's the conclusion. You would think we would know that, but it's more complicated than how much to produce a chick and all of that. I think it's a great idea.
We have all this by Thursday?
Yeah. Yes. Which Thursday? Okay, so if we filled up one slide, are we done? Is that our limit? We can't go anymore? Good. This is good. Again, I don't see this as being anything final. I think there's some work to do on that list and a few other ideas that have been thrown out here to refine it and organize that list. But I think this is an actionable list that we can start working on and start to try to get that the whole existing research infrastructure, turn that battleship in this direction a little bit and start producing some of this information. Thanks.
Tyler and I were frantically writing down those ideas, but just in case we don't lose the nuance, could I ask you folks that submitted ideas to scribble them on a piece of paper, put your name and association and hand it to Tyler or Greg or I in the next few minutes or over break. So we're at break, and also another task, if I could give you that, is start thinking about the questions that we want to ask the panel. And I think it's wide open, could deal with simple things like data, could deal with how we model populations or identify research needs, could deal with policy. And so I think it's fine to ask some of those hard questions. Some of the things that Ryan talked about was kind of perhaps the elephant in the room, but I think that's okay too if you have questions regarding those broader policy issues. So with that, we'll reconvene in 30 minutes.